Hello, my name is Curtis Smith, and my favorite thing are movies from the 1970s.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. Today, I am joined by author Curtis Smith. Curtis has published over 125 stories and essays, and his work has been cited or included in the Best American Short Stories, the Best American Mystery Stories, the Best American Spiritual Writing, the Best Small Fictions, the Best Microfictions, and the W.W. Norton Anthology New Micro. He has worked with indie presses to put out 5 story collections, 2 essay collections, 1 book of creative nonfiction, and 6 novels. His 2020 novel, The Magpie's Return, has cited by Kirkus Reviews as an indie pick of 2020, and his 2023 novel, The Lost and the Blind, was a finalist for Forward Review's Best Indie Fiction Book of the Year. His next novel, Deaf Heaven, will be released in May of 2025. He has also published over 100 author interviews in literary journals and websites. Curtis, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited to be here tonight.
I'm excited to get to know you. As we were saying before we hit record, we have Jim Mikulski from the JMWW Journal as a common person.
Yeah, that's correct. And also you interviewed Ben Tanzer the other year.
Yes.
So I've never met Ben in person. I met Jen a number of times, but yeah, Ben and I kind of publish in the same places and we've corresponded. I've done interviews with him a couple times, and that kind of led me to you.
Ben is a treat. I am very lucky that he's a Chicago person, and so we have met in person, both professionally and podcasterly. Does that make sense?
He's been doing his podcast for a really long time, and so have you. So hats off.
Thank you. Yeah, he's been doing this podcast Will Change Your Life for 10 or 12 years, maybe?
I think so. I think
maybe longer.
20, yeah. Back before we knew what it was, or what I knew what it was.
Yeah. It was definitely before I was listening to podcasts. I knew that Ben had one. Well, I'm so glad you reached out. Your next novel, Deaf Heaven, is coming out in May. So tell me a little bit about your new book and how it came to be.
Okay. So I think I've reached the point, in my career where I think the last thing the world needs is another book from me. And I'm trying to, still find joy and engagement in the process. So I've been consciously, I talk to my students a lot about access points and how we get into our work. And so I've been really making a conscious effort to access, my new projects maybe through different avenues that I, hadn't utilized before. And I read something about Flannery O'Connor, who talked about her access was always through mood or tone. Mm-hmm. And I thought I'd try that. And so that was how I originally got into this piece, is I imagined something, just through mood and tone. And I kind of tied that in with my love of movies and kind of went down this whole dark, noir sort of avenue. So yeah, that's how it started. And I'm glad I got to see it through to the end. And, my next project will be on to, a different kind of access point. But I enjoyed this process this time.
So when you got the inspiration from Flannery O'Connor to go in through mood or vibe, how did you pick? Did you go to a magic 8-ball? Did you how did you pick the mood that you wanted to try writing from?
I think if I was going to pick a mood, I think that would probably be already at the top of the list. It would be the 8-ball had the same thing on 4 of its 8 sides, probably. Because I think that's my go-to. A lot of times if I'm writing, I write longhand. If I'm writing an early draft or planning it out, I do a lot of planning first. I oftentimes have the TV on in the background, but just muted. And I just like having old black and white movies in the background. And I don't know why it helps me go somewhere. I think that was just a easy leap for me to go from, oh, that's in the background to, trying to realize that sort of, feeling on the page or through the story I was wrestling with at the time.
Yeah. So when you first emailed me, here's what you said about Deaf Heaven. It's a short literary novel about a man who gets away with murder but loses his soul and then tries to regain his soul or at least find some grace. Wow. That's a big, that does feel noir to me. It does. It feels Twilight Zone, black and white Twilight Zone-ish.
That's interesting. I teach a college class, and part of it's Twilight Zone centered.
Really?
So, yes. Shout out to, I can't remember the guy's name. Shout out, he teaches at Indiana. And I had this idea and I saw he taught this course. And so I reached out to him, we conversed, and it's really interesting. It's an interesting course. I think the students like it. But anyway.
Is it a screenwriting course or is it a like philosophy through pop culture? Or tell me more about the Twilight Zone on your syllabus.
Okay, so it's a first year seminar class, and it's a class for like first year students, and much of the class is like, oh, let's get used to college, let's find out where places are in campus and things like that. But they all have a theme, and my theme, the first half of the semester, is movies. So we watch like The Graduate and Do the Right Thing and High Noon, and we talk about the history behind them and the cultural moments. And then the second half, we watch 6 different Twilight Zone episodes, and most of that is like psychological or philosophical, the elements that are brought up in them. And it helps that it's kind of like these short, 20, 22-minute things, and it keeps their attention. And it really seems to speak to this generation. And I think many of them were unfamiliar with it. So I'm happy to be the person that kind of exposed them to that.
Yeah, I was trying to think of my nephew who's a sophomore at Ole Miss right now, if he would have encountered classic Twilight Zones growing up. And I don't think he did.
No, not like us. I mean, we stayed up. And as far as the movie goes, I'm heartened by every semester how many of my students really love The Graduate.
Yeah.
That seems to speak to that age, even though it's, nearly 60 years old now.
Mm-hmm. So that was a little side path.
Yeah, we got off the subject there. Sorry.
It was great. Well, you can't tell me you teach Twilight Zone in class and then just let it go.
That's true. That's on me.
So your novel is about a man who gets away with murder but loses his soul and then is trying to get it back.
Right. I had originally, in my original planning, like, I often talk to my writing students about, we approach this task differently, and everyone's different. Their brains are different. And I'm kind of a science and math guy beforehand. And so I need to see where things are going. But this one kind of threw a curve at me. I thought I was going to end with losing his soul. And then the story kind of reared up and said, no, we want to keep going. And so, it's about his efforts to try to, make amends or try to find, some grace in his life after doing these things. And it's not like he's a straight up murderer. It's kind of a situational. And so, it's not like he's like a really bad guy to begin with, but he does some bad things. So it was interesting for me. I mean, it was one of the few times like a novel has really said, no, I don't want to end here. I want another act to resolve this.
So was that, you thought you were done, and did the character wake you up in the middle of the night, or you were doing an edit and then you just were like, I have to add another chapter? How did this realizing you needed to add another act compare to other times when you've known a work was done?
Well, that's a good question. As I said, I plan things out pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
And I planned this one out, and I thought, this was my ending. And I think it probably hit me, as I was doing that first draft of pen on paper. And I just thought, this person isn't done yet. And I think there can be another, element of his arc that could be, satisfying. And, he just kind of led me in a whole new direction and new locale and a new set of characters. And yeah, I was, I'm happy with the way it turned out. It was challenging, but it was fun at the same time.
Yeah. Are you approaching your new works with a little more openness, or are you've gone back to planning?
Oh, well, I've tried to dive into things, but it always devolves into planning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying the new access points. This novel comes out in May, and just, last week I just signed my next 2 books. And one was a story collection. So it's been building for years. But the other was a new novel, and I thought I'd try like an image-driven sort of feel for that.
Okay.
And, I was happy with that. So we'll see what the next, incarnation brings.
So for an image-driven, is that you're getting out tarot cards, you're flipping through a magazine? Like, where is that coming from?
So I was in one of the writing classes I teach. I do this activity where we look at the photos of Vivian Maier, who I believe was a Chicago person.
Chicago photographer.
Right.
And Annie.
And we look at her stuff and we, do these activities like, well, I'll show one of her pictures and for like a minute and then write a first sentence. What could this be? And we do like 20 of them. And so I thought I'd try the same thing. I used Mary Ellen Mark. I have a book of her photographs. And I was just this picture of these, 2 women in jail in Houston, like in the early 80s. And I just started, weaving a story from those 2. And it, that one, really led me down this other road, with the whole different narrative. And that was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I really like that. I have a set of cards from the Center for Creative Leadership. I used to facilitate meetings. And so it's, like 100 images, some are photographs, some are art, some are cartoons. And they are meant to help, like you'll put them all out on the table and you'll ask the group of people that you're facilitating, like whatever the question is, the big tough question you've been asking, you're working on, to find the image that explains like where they're at with the question at the moment. So it might be like, we're on day 2 of a 3-day retreat. How are you feeling about the future of this organization? And it's pictures of Olympic athletes. It's paintings of ships on stormy seas. It's women having picnics in the 1800s. It's just like a very wide, very diverse set of pictures. And I always found it really helped people who maybe weren't used to like talking about their feelings in a work setting or accessing like metaphors, if you've got a group of accountants.
Right.
And you give them pictures and you're like, find the picture that speaks to like how you're feeling right now. But also use them once with a friend on brainstorming like product ideas. So I think that's really interesting to use photographs as the starting point to a story. I love that.
Yeah. I always try to, kids are so different, everyone's so different in the creative process, and they're just finding their way. And I think it's helpful to know like, hey, I'm a visual person, or hey, I'm a, situational person. I need to hear conversation. So we try to hit all of those, I think, and it helps me too as a writer to remind myself, there's different ways to go about this. So, I'm thankful, for that experience and to be reminded of, all the different avenues we can take in the process.
Yeah. Your students are lucky.
They're
lucky.
Well, I've been teaching now for 42 years, so hopefully I have my game on now.
Yeah.
So
So your new novel, Deaf Heaven, it'll be available in May of 2025. So people should put it on their lists and get ready to pre-order it as soon as that's available. Who are you publishing with?
This is with Running Wild Press. They're out of California. They've done my last 2 novels, so and they've done a really nice job with them and put some, a little bit of weight behind them, getting the word out and doing the audiobooks. So in the indie world, it's nice to have a publisher who's, doing some work along with the author. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Do you get to pick your narrator?
Yeah, they sent me a whole bunch of audio files, which was a cool experience.
Yeah.
So I picked one for the new novel, and the one for the last novel, for The Lost and the Blind. He did a great job. He really hit it out of the park. So I was lucky to hook up with him.
That's so cool. And what do you do? Local events? Do you do book tours? How do you typically celebrate a launch?
So, yeah, that's a good question, because it's changed. And, COVID changed things, and my trajectory was always, a little different. So I do less bookstores than I used to do, just because they take such a cut, and I like to make enough gas money to go home.
Yep.
So I've been reaching out and doing more podcasts. There's some colleges I've done gigs at in the area, and they have me back, and I'll do teaching for the day or the night, and then I'll do a reading. And a lot of the stuff I do like online, since I interview so many people. Oftentimes when a book comes out, I'll hit them up. Hey, can I appear on your thing? Or
yep.
So I've changed. Yeah, I have changed my strategy some since COVID. And I think part of it, and I'll do a couple readings here and there, but part of it, I think, is as an audience member, I don't enjoy readings all that much. I go in support, but I have a hard time like focusing on readings. And I think that's one of the main reasons I started doing interviews, because I wanted to support the community. But sometimes when I go to a reading, I usually just have to keep my head down and imagine the words. I get distracted by the reader and things around me. And so I've changed a little bit, but I'll still be doing some things. I don't hire a publicist. I might when I have the next two books come out, because they're going to come out together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just discovering about the whole publicist thing. I didn't really understand it until, a couple years ago. But I see people with publicists doing well, and I might try that in the future.
Yeah. Well, it helps because they've already got a Rolodex of podcasts and people to start with, for sure. Well, I love that you are doing the DIY approach. I'm grateful you reached out to me, and we will link to other story collections, and I'm sure you've got an author's page on bookshop.org, so we'll get linked to that as well. And then people can watch that for your May 2025 release. Well, Curt, the book is what brought us together today, but we're also here to talk about some of your favorite things. What are we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I know I proposed this, but I'm a huge fan of movies from the 70s and that whole new Hollywood era.
Outstanding.
Yeah, so I'm ready to geek out over my love of this time period. So
awesome. Well, you've listened to a few episodes, which means you probably know I do like to time travel with my guests. Do you remember what movie made you a movie guy?
Oh boy. Well, I'm going to go out of the 70s then. I wrote an essay a number of years ago about the thing that kind of got me into teaching. And it was like 1968. I went with my aunt to see To Sir with Love. And I think that kind of set my mind. I don't know if I would have been a teacher. I hate to say that if it weren't for that movie.
Wow.
And I think, movies were different then. I mean, I grew up, just outside city line in Philly.
Yeah.
And I could walk to or bike to probably 5 different movie theaters. And I did a lot of movie going by the time I was 10 until, I graduated from high school. So I was born in 1960. So I kind of, I'm right in the 70s there. But
yeah,
I would see a lot of movies that were, I'm sure, like way over my head. But that was like the fare that you would find. I remember seeing The Godfather in the movie theater, or The Conversation, Dog Day Afternoon. And again, maybe they were beyond me at some levels, but they really, made an impression. And looking back on it now, I feel, I don't know, that time just feels so artistically, alive and so daring. in a way compared to, what movies have become or mainstream movies have become.
Yeah. So when you think about the 70s and New Hollywood, have you ever taught a class about that era of film?
No, not specifically. No, most of my teaching now is in the creative writing area, but I do have that seminar class, on the side where I do teach film. Now, most of the film I teach with them is, trying to reach them where they are,
Sure.
rather than, here's the old guy putting on his old films again. But, they have enjoyed, some of the things I brought in. So, hats off to them for keeping an open mind with the boomer.
So you've rattled off a few. Let's start with what are some of your favorites of the era?
Oh, okay. I would have to say, I tend to think of like directors more so
Okay.
and their clumps of work during that time.
Yeah.
I think if I had to pick, a favorite, it would probably be Nashville. I love Robert Altman. And he made films in the 70s, like Nashville, which I think is really, if we look back on it now, it's super prophetic of maybe where we are right now as a society.
Yeah.
And McCabe and Mrs. Miller, that's a favorite. The Long Goodbye. Coppola during the 70s with The Godfather and Conversation and Apocalypse Now.
Yep.
Scorsese, with I love Mean Streets. It's my favorite Scorsese. But, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull came out in 80, but there's still some movies, from 80, 81 that I still kind of consider, 70s movies.
Yeah.
My wife and I went down a Brian De Palma rabbit hole not long ago, and movies like Blowout and Sisters. I love Terrence Malick, like Days of Heaven, Badlands. So I think those would be my go-to guys of the decade. I just saw, what did we just see? I just saw The Candidate, which I had never seen before, with Robert Redford, and that was really interesting. And The Parallax View, which I hadn't seen before, with Warren Beatty. And I think I just love they're all kind of gritty. They're all kind of paranoid in a way. And, we're coming out of Vietnam and Watergate.
Yep.
There's a lot of them that have like these great captured time period of New York City that I find really interesting. So, yeah, I all of them, and I'm still discovering more as we go through. We're just starting to go down the Cassavetes, rabbit hole. And I hadn't really watched much of his stuff. And we're watching Woman Under the Influence right now, which is awesome. I can't wait to watch the rest of his films.
Right. I mean, they're gritty because, one, they're shot on film, which is so beautiful when things are shot on film versus digital. Not that it was a choice at the time, but I have a deeper appreciation for film, things shot on film now than I did, in the 80s when it was still shot on film. But there's a way that things shot on film take you to a time and place, and give you information about the era that digital just doesn't provide. There's extra information that digital doesn't provide.
You're right. And that's such a visual texture to it. It really does. And it might not be as sharp, maybe as like your current movies, but I kind of like that sort of, it's a little blurred here and there, and it's not as crisp, but I enjoy those warmer colors. I feel like the colors are warmer. Now that, maybe that's my TV set, it needs to be replaced, but that's just the feel I get from them. And I just, there's a lot of people doing great stuff today, but I don't feel that driving the market, the way I think it drove the market in that decade. And
yeah.
I think that was really an interesting time.
So I'm curious, you mentioned that you and your wife are now going back and you're revisiting directors either that you didn't watch before or movies that slipped by you. Are movies from the 70s a new favorite thing, or have they held a place in your heart since the 70s?
I can't say they held a place in my heart in the 80s because maybe that was too close. But not too long after that. So I would say by the time, the late 80s, early 90s rolled around, I was nostalgic already for that time. Because I felt like, I don't know, I felt like as we got through to the later part of the 80s, I didn't feel that same engagement anymore, like from the current fare that was going out there. I didn't feel like the same chances
Yeah.
were being taken. And they were, by some people, but again, not, I felt like of the movie theaters I could have gone to when I was growing up, at least one of them had something that was, challenging. One of them was showing Dr. Dolittle, of course, or, something
Right.
along those lines, but there was something challenging in one of them. And then I don't really, I feel that today, but I don't feel it to the same degree. And I don't think people, the artist, the director I think they're probably under more pressure to make a return, to make money. I think there was more leniency given to maybe a director's vision at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was also just the market, the business of Hollywood.
Right.
Was still so different in the 70s.
And that's a conversation I have with my students is to, for example, when The Graduate came out, it was released, but then it would come back again in 6 months. And then maybe another 6 months, it would come back again. So it wasn't like it had to kill on opening day weekend.
Right.
And it allowed movies to kind of organically, word of mouth, go check this out. And, that caught on with college audiences. And, just any experience these days, it's so fragmented. Back when we had 3 main TV channels and you go to work the next day, chances are like 20% at least of the people saw the same thing you did at the same time. And we've kind of lost that. And I haven't been to a movie theater since the pandemic. So I don't know if I'm going back again.
Yeah.
It would take something for me to go back. And, now we have these huge TVs at home. I don't know. And part of me is nostalgic for that time, but I don't know if I'm really, rip roaring to get back in a theater and sit around a bunch of people watching a movie for 2 hours.
Yeah. So during COVID, a year, like after the vaccines, we had the vaccines in like spring of 21. In summer of 21, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I hadn't been in a movie theater the whole time. But one of my friends and I started a tradition. I had chemo on Fridays. And I don't know if you know this, but they give you steroids when they give you chemotherapy. And so you are jacked up on steroids for like 48 hours after chemotherapy, or I was. And so we would go on steroid Saturdays. We would find a movie that was on its last legs, because now all the theaters, you can pick your seats. So we would find a movie that nobody was going to, and we would go see like a matinee in an empty theater. And it's one of like my really bright spots from when I was having treatment. But now we have gotten the Regal Unlimited Pass, which is like $22 a month. And it's all the movies you can eat. Like it's all the movies you can consume in a month. So the bar is on the floor for what we will see. And we prioritize movies that you want to see you want to like big sound, big screen, like the theater. So we prioritize action, superhero movies. That's what we prioritize. But what's been really interesting is because of the strike, there's less coming out right now in the theaters.
Right.
And they are finally letting the sleeper hits actually have some time on the screen. So there's a movie out now called The Substance with Demi Moore.
Yeah, I've heard of it, yes.
It's body horror. It is. I thought I was going to throw up for an hour after we got out of the theater. I was so nauseous from its practical effects. It is an amazing movie. I never need to see it again.
I was going to ask you, so is that like a thumbs up that it made you feel that way? Because I do like to be moved, but sometimes things move me in the wrong direction.
It's so good you just don't see horror with practical effects like this anymore. So that was worthwhile. The really pushing the idea of the male gaze to like the ultimate point. And like, what does it mean for a woman to turn 50 and be too old, to like work in Hollywood? The idea that like Demi Moore is a ugly woman past her prime, which is insanity. It is. I do give it is worth seeing. And it was one where I was so glad we were around people, because now we do go to movies with like people in the audience, because I got to see that other people were also covering their eyes.
Yeah.
And people were yelling and screaming. And I was like, oh, thankfully, they've let this movie have some breathing room. It's still in the theater. It came out like a month or 6 weeks ago. And if it wasn't for kind of the dearth of movies post-strike, it wouldn't be getting its time to shine.
Well, that's an interesting point. That really is. And I think that you're right. We don't give these things time to breathe.
Yeah.
Or create some buzz. And if that movie came out and, underperformed that first weekend, who knows how many theaters it would have been in the second weekend.
Yeah. That would have been gone so fast. Yeah. And we've lost, I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana. So we had first run theaters, but we also had a dollar theater that was second, third run. And it was it was the movie house. It was the vaudeville theater. So movies would come back around. You'd have a second or third chance to see it if you missed it. And I think that was such an important part of the movie experience before everything was on demand.
Right. Now that you say that, I can't believe I forgot about the dollar movie theater. There was one in every town. Like, I remember seeing The Exorcist in one of those back in our neighborhood. And how, it was big last summer, but now you're right. It's like a year later almost. Yeah. And so, yeah. And I think, on demand changed everything, and, VHS all the way back then, it just it changed the experience. But I'll have to put down that. I've heard good things about that Demi Moore movie. I'd like to check that out now.
The Substance. It is real intense. Real intense. But just, there were a couple times where I was like, it's ending now. They'll let us use our imagination. And it was not ending. And they were like, no. You're not, whatever you're imagining, you're not there yet.
We're not done with you.
Not done with you. Very powerful. So I love going to the movies. And I think it comes from having the dollar movie theater, and, it was just running around with friends seeing movies. That was great.
Yeah. And I guess maybe someday I'll head back, but yeah, I admit that sometimes, I think as I get older, I have less patience with the general public. So,
sure.
And there's something about the experience that, sometimes people, like, they bring in trays of food, and mm-hmm. It just kind of, takes away from my focus. Maybe the problem's my focus. This is the second time I've mentioned it. But yeah, that dollar theater, that brings back such memories, because those places were like wonderfully shabby also. Mm-hmm. and I think of like all the ones that we had that I went to over the years.
Yeah. Shabby and just making their money on soda.
Yes.
So I'm curious, when you think about that time, you said you named 5 or so directors who are your key directors at the time. Were there actors or actresses that stand out for you that you tried to watch everything they did in that era?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, you think of, like Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman. He did a lot of great stuff in the time. Robert Redford, you think he's just a pretty guy, but Butch Cassidy is a great movie. The Candidate's a great movie. 3 Days of the Condor is a really great movie. Warren Beatty with Shampoo and, Reds, I thought was great. Faye Dunaway, I was a big fan of. And of course, there's De Niro and Pacino and that whole crew.
Right. All the mob guys.
All the mob guys. Yeah. And, I was also at the time, I think starting in the late 70s through the 80s, Woody Allen was putting out a lot of, really interesting stuff, for a time period. So yeah, well, I was drawn to some. I know we think of John Travolta in a certain way, like from his TV start, but I love movies like Blowout or Urban Cowboy. I thought he did wonderful work in those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Travolta's had like 4 careers.
Yes,
At
yes.
least. And when you think of those directors from the 70s, are there any of them that you also like, you like their modern work, or you kind of stick with them in their 70s?
Uh, no, my favorite Terrence Malick film is Tree of Life, which I could watch over, and that's one of the last movies I saw in a movie theater, and
Mm-hmm.
and I just like cried, and I didn't even know why, because I think I was understanding it, but it was just so visually wonderful. I think Robert Altman made great films up until his death.
Mm-hmm.
Gosford Park was great. I like that movie he made about the fashion, and Hit the Player was awesome. I'm kind of anxious to see this new Coppola film. I've heard
Megalopolis.
yes, I've heard mixed things about it, but any guy who does The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, I'll give him another shot with my
Yeah,
afternoon. So
it's beautifully shot.
okay, so you saw it.
I saw it. I saw it in the theater because I was
Okay.
like, this one needs big screen, big sound. It also needed an intermission. And I also felt like I didn't know enough Greek and Roman history. I felt like, oh, this is actually a movie I would be enjoying more if I had Wikipedia open,
Okay.
because I know enough to know that these are illusions, not just illusions, sometimes like direct, like very direct. But I felt like, oh, if I had Wikipedia open and I was able to like give myself pop-up videos and a little bit of trivia while I watched it, I would have gotten more out of the movie while I was watching it.
Okay. You mentioned intermissions. What was the last movie you saw with an intermission in it?
2001 Space Odyssey.
Okay. I remember that. I remember Lawrence
Yeah.
of Arabia had one. Reds had one. But when you said that, I was thinking it's been a long time since I saw a movie with an intermission.
Yeah. And it was because 2001 Space Odyssey, there was a 70 millimeter, they remastered it. And so our local art house theater helped fund the remaster of the 70 millimeter 2001. And so they showed it with an intermission.
Oh, very cool.
And possibly RRR, which was a Bollywood, not technically not Bollywood, I think Tollywood, an Indian movie, came out 2 or 3 years ago, and it was just wild. And I went to that one at our local art house theater. 700 people, sold out. This is one of the top, if not the top, movie going experience of my life.
Oh, very cool.
Sold out movie theater, people cheering, dancing during the big dance number. They won the Oscar for best song the year they came out. So whatever the Bollywood song was that won in the last like 3 or 4 years, this is the movie. But it was just like singing, dancing, cheering, just a rowdy crowd in an old theater with an organ. It
Wow.
was fabulous.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Hey, can I go back and give you another answer to a question now that it came to me?
Yes. My
So
favorite.
you were talking about like pivotal experiences with movies.
Yeah.
7 or 8 years old, and my father took my brother and I downtown into like Center City, Philly. My mom, I think, had the Bridge Club over, something like that. And we were going to go see The Jungle Book.
Mm.
But The Jungle Book was sold out. So my father took us next door to see Bonnie and Clyde. And and that put a twist on my little brain. And
Right?
I think maybe that's the origin story right there.
Yeah.
So it took me a minute to dig that out.
Whoops.
Whoops.
Yeah. Were you the youngest kid or the oldest kid?
I was the youngest.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, shout out to my dad for that one.
Yeah, sometimes my parents made the biggest movie mistake I remember my parents making was we just loved Bette Midler growing up. We loved everything she was in. And she had a movie, I don't think I can remember the name. It was her and Danny DeVito, and she gets kidnapped.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And her family doesn't want her back.
Okay.
And there's a scene where two people are having sex in a car and like leaning out of the car, full body nudity. And my mom just thought, well, if it's Bette Midler, it's going to be kid friendly. It wasn't, but it was just, that's the one movie I remember, that and like Poltergeist. I saw that too young.
Yeah. Oh, that was scary as a college kid when I saw it.
I don't know how well you remember it, but we had Kentucky Fried Chicken the night we watched Poltergeist on TV. And there is a pivotal scene with chicken in that movie that makes you never want to have fried chicken again ever in your life.
I think, is that when it slides across the floor or something?
I think maggots come out of the chicken.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
It's a good thing you weren't eating at the time, maybe?
Yeah. Not at the exact moment, but...
That's funny.
Yeah. Another great movie, now it's just movie memories,
Yeah.
was I did love, again, like when movies were rare and when they would come back around, like Disney would actually release things from the vault and they were back in the theater for the first time in 7 years. And every generation of kids got to have their moment with every Disney movie. That was magical. But I loved once a year when The Wizard of Oz would be on TV.
Oh my goodness, of course. And you couldn't leave because we didn't have VCRs at the time.
Right.
And so if you had to go to the bathroom, you missed, whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a thing.
And that was like appointment television. And our cousin would come over and spend the night and we would make a bunch of popcorn. And that's what we were doing. It was like the annual viewing of The Wizard of Oz. And so special.
And at school the next day, that was the big topic of conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. And that experience is no longer with us,
Mm-mm. No, the rare, we were all there. We all watched it together is just like a thing of the past. It's really such a, right? Only from the invention of radio to like the invention of the VCR. Like that's sort of the window on some of like mass media, mass experiences. Right.
And, you're right. And it started to disintegrate, with the VCR. And now it's only like sports and, that we all experience at the same time.
Yeah.
Or election results.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof, that was
yes.
It's a hard one to sit with. Yeah, it's I guess I don't want to discount newspapers and serialized printed word before that, but still that's different than like, was it War of the Worlds on the radio?
Yes.
Right?
As a kid, I had that on record. That was like one of my favorite things.
Cool.
Yes, I wish I still had it.
Oh, that's great. Do you have movies that you return to that are comfort movies for you, or just favorites that you throw them on because they're your favorite movie, and even if you only watch 20 minutes, that's a good 20 minutes?
I have some, like I'll watch like some movies like every Christmas. Oftentimes, though, like if I have the TV on, there are certain movies that are on cable a lot that kind of fit that bill. Like,
yeah,
I'll spend, I'll watch Goodfellas, for 15 minutes, whatever scene it is, or to go down a less serious route, I can watch Will Ferrell for 15 or 20 minutes and
absolutely
feel better about the world.
Yep.
Yeah, and there, like, I could see, like, Christmas time, there's a movie called Metropolitan that is, like, one of my favorite Christmas movies. It's this low-budget thing from, like, the early 90s. I kind of fall into it with Kill Bill
when
I see that one. But, there are, like, every so many years, like, I'll pull out, like, Nashville, or I'll pull out, like, All That Jazz. It's one of my favorite movies, or Dog Day Afternoon, or The Deer Hunter. And I kind of look forward to those moments. So it's been a while since I've seen this, and it's always nice to return to them.
Yeah, The Godfather is one of my favorite movies of that time that I watch more than any. It is one of my most repeated movies.
Oh, for sure. Now, do you enjoy two more than one?
So I was just telling in my last interview, I was interviewing my rabbi about it. And the first time I encountered The Godfather, AMC had re-edited it into chronological order.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So that's how I originally saw it. Was I saw Sicily first. Like, young Michael, he kills the guy, he goes to Sicily, he has his first marriage, he's sent back home. So I do have a real sweet spot for that part of Godfather 2.
Okay.
Right? Isn't that in Godfather 2?
Michael in Sicily is in 1.
That's in 1.
Sicily, we see his father in Sicily in 2.
Okay.
That's Robert De Niro.
Okay.
Playing young, what's the dad's name? Vito. Is it Vito?
Vito Corleone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I remember that edit. And I think they showed that on like NBC too, or some of the major networks. And I remember seeing that edit. And I don't know if I like it better, but it was interesting.
Yeah. So I didn't see it like properly until, so that would have been 2001 because I was in Colorado. So 2001, I see the chronological cut. It's probably 2005, 2006 before I see it in the correct order.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh, yes, I do like this movie. This is very good. So, but it's been a few years since I've watched it. I am definitely due for a rewatch.
I distinctly remember my first viewing of that. I was 14. And I probably look like, when I was 14, I probably looked like I was like 10. And somehow we talked our way into an R-rated movie. And that was a really great experience too. That really stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah. Have you read the Mike Nichols biography that came out in the last couple of years?
No, I did not. I saw him on American Masters. There was a show about him, but I didn't realize he had a book out.
I think it's a biography about him, not an autobiography. And it is phenomenal.
Ah, very cool.
Because there's a level at which Mike Nichols was a real life Forrest Gump. He directed, I don't remember if he wrote and directed The Graduate or just directed it. But he's got The Graduate, he's got hits on Broadway, he has movies throughout his career. He shares a pool with the conductor of the New York Symphony Orchestra. Like, he just knows everyone and he's everywhere. He's a writer, he's a director, on and off stage. And it was fascinating how much formative popular culture had his thumbprint on it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The American Masters about him went deep into his stage work and how that, influenced his, if I'm recalling it rightly, how he would frame his shots. I remember that connection there.
Yeah. But I highly recommend, I listened to the audiobook. It's really well narrated. And then I think I bought copies of it, definitely for my dad, maybe for a couple more people. Because I was just like, oh, I'm obsessed with this book. Everybody has to read it now. It's very good. I highly recommend it. Well, Curt, is there anything else about 70s movies or just your love of movies or going to the movie theater when you're a kid that if we don't talk about it, you'd be bummed?
Oh, dear. I'm sure I'll think of something later.
Right.
But for now, I think I hit the main ones. Yeah, I'm just happy to have a chance to geek out a little bit and share that with the world there.
Yeah. I wrote down Nashville. I think I've seen it, but I'm going to put that on my list to watch soon.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Altman's known for his dialogue, his overlapping dialogue. And there's I think there's like 24 different story arcs, character arcs in this, and they all kind of come together. And it's in the background is this whole political movement.
Yeah.
which kind of reeks of like the Ross Perot sort of movement, which, has led to other places.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the mix of entertainment and politics, and with all these personal stories going on in the background. It's chaotic, but it's really, and it's got some really good music in it too.
It has to. That's required.
Yeah, for sure. And I think most of the people wrote and performed their own songs. And there's some really interesting tunes in there.
Nice. Well, I'll add that to my list. And then one of the wonderful things Rob does is help capture when we talk about movies or directors. He helps me with my show notes. So everybody will have a checklist of 70s directors and movies to watch in the show notes of this episode.
I'll spread the love. Thanks, Rob. All right.
So last time, your new book, Deaf Heaven, will be released in May of 2025. People can also hop on Bookshop or other independent booksellers and grab The Magpie's Return and The Lost and the Blind. Curt, do you like to be found on the internet?
I don't have a web page anymore. I found out I was doing as much through Facebook, as anything else. So, hey, hit me up there. I'm always on there. I think that's my only platform now these days.
It's better to just focus on one than to try and do them all half-assed. So
yeah, and that was just too time consuming. I do have an Instagram, but I don't even know how to get back on it. I'll admit.
Fair. Well, people can find Finding Favorites on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, wherever podcasts are given away for free.
All right.
Please rate and review, subscribe, rate it 5 stars. Tell someone to give us a listen. It all helps. Finding Favorites is edited and engineered by Rob Abrazado. Thank you, Rob. And with that, keep enjoying your favorite things.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.